Everyone assumed she was just another gentle flower shop owner arranging petals in downtown Portland when the armed robbery turned into a hostage situation. But when the SWAT commander discovered her military background through the police database, he looked directly at the trembling woman behind the counter and said 5 words that changed everything. "Ma'am, we need your help." The negotiator asked incredulously, "Her? She looks like she'd faint at loud noises." The commander replied with absolute certainty, "Sergeant First Class Marina Chen, explosives ordnance disposal, 3 tours in Afghanistan. She's exactly who we need right now." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other Tuesday at Bloom and Blossom Flower Shop on Southeast Morrison Street. Marina Chen arrived at 6:30, her small frame barely visible behind the massive delivery of white roses and baby's breath destined for the Henderson wedding. At 5 feet 2 inches with delicate hands that seemed designed for handling fragile petals, she moved through her flower shop with the quiet grace of someone who had found her calling among growing things. The regular customers knew her as the soft-spoken woman who remembered every anniversary, every birthday, every funeral arrangement with genuine care. Mrs. Patterson from the apartment complex next door often commented to her friends that Marina was too gentle for this harsh world, too trusting, too kind. The UPS driver who made daily deliveries always spoke extra softly around her, assuming she was one of those fragile artistic types who startled easily at sudden movements or raised voices. Marina's flower shop occupied a corner building with large windows that showcased elaborate seasonal displays. Passers-by often stopped to admire her intricate arrangements, the way she combined unexpected color palettes, how she made even the simplest bouquet look like it belonged in a high-end magazine. What they didn't notice was how her eyes constantly scanned the street, how she positioned herself with clear sight lines to both exits, how she kept her hands steady even when working with the most delicate blooms. The shop attracted a particular clientele: young professionals buying apology flowers after relationship mistakes, nervous boyfriends seeking the perfect proposal bouquet, grief-stricken families needing funeral arrangements. Marina handled each situation with the same gentle competence, her voice never rising above a soothing murmur, her movements economical and precise. She wore flowing skirts and cardigans in soft pastels, her long black hair often tucked behind her ears while she worked, reading glasses perched on her nose when she calculated orders. 3 doors down, Tony's Deli served the lunch crowd with its loud Italian-American owner, who gestured dramatically while taking sandwich orders. Across the street, the vintage bookstore attracted quiet intellectuals who browsed for hours without buying anything. The neighborhood had a comfortable rhythm, a sense of safety, the kind of place where people left car doors unlocked and children walked to school alone. Marina had cultivated this peaceful existence deliberately. After leaving the military 5 years ago, she had searched specifically for a neighborhood that felt like the opposite of everything she had experienced overseas. No sudden explosions, no constant vigilance, no life or death decisions made in split seconds. Just flowers, beauty, growth, and the simple pleasure of creating something lovely for people celebrating life's important moments. Her customers saw exactly what she wanted them to see: a woman who had probably studied art history or botanical science, who spoke in gentle tones about the symbolic meaning of different flowers, who recommended baby roses for new mothers and white lily for memorial services. They assumed she lived alone with maybe a cat, read romance novels, watched cooking shows, lived the kind of quiet existence that people with exciting careers envied. The truth was more complicated. Marina did live alone, but her apartment above the flower shop contained elements that would have surprised her customers. A carefully maintained workout routine that began every morning at 5 A diet that consisted primarily of lean proteins and vegetables, the kind of disciplined nutrition that maintained physical readiness rather than simply health. Books on subjects that ranged far beyond horticulture, though she kept those volumes carefully hidden behind the more expected titles, about flower arranging and small business management. Her hands, which customers admired for their gentleness with delicate petals, bore small scars that she explained away as accidents with thorns. Her posture, which seemed relaxed and feminine, actually maintained the kind of awareness that came from years of training. Her sleep schedule, regular and disciplined, reflected habits formed in environments where alertness could mean the difference between returning home and becoming a casualty statistic. But Marina had worked hard to bury that part of herself. The flower shop represented her conscious choice to embrace a different kind of life, to focus on creating beauty instead of preventing destruction, to work with her hands in ways that brought joy instead of requiring the precise technical knowledge that could save lives or end them. On this particular Tuesday morning, she was preparing for what should have been a routine day. The Henderson wedding arrangements needed final touches. Mrs. Chen from the community center had ordered table decorations for their monthly senior lunch. A young man had called about surprising his girlfriend with something special for their 2-year anniversary. Normal requests from normal people living normal lives. Marina moved through her morning routine with the efficient grace that characterized all her actions. She checked the walk-in cooler where dozens of arrangements waited in various stages of completion. She verified that yesterday's deliveries had arrived in good condition. She prepared her workspace with the tools she would need for the day's orders, arranging them in the precise patterns that allowed her to work quickly without wasted motion. The shop's atmosphere was carefully cultivated to promote calm. Soft classical music played from speakers hidden among the displayed plants. The lighting was warm and natural, designed to show flowers at their most beautiful. The air circulation system maintained perfect humidity levels, while ensuring that the fragrance of the blooms remained pleasant rather than overwhelming. Every detail had been considered and planned to create an environment where people felt comfortable making important purchases. At 8 o'clock, Marina unlocked the front door and flipped the sign from closed to open. The morning light streamed through the large windows, illuminating the carefully arranged displays that she had spent the previous evening perfecting. She had learned that presentation was everything in the flower business. Customers needed to see possibilities, to imagine how her arrangements would transform their special occasions into something memorable. The first customer of the day was Mr. Rodriguez, a regular who stopped by every Wednesday to buy a small bouquet for his wife of 37 years. He always chose yellow roses, always paid in exact change, always asked Marina to include a note that said simply "still falling in love with you every day." Marina had his order prepared before he walked through the door, understanding that some routines were sacred and should never be disrupted. As the morning progressed, the familiar rhythm of her business day established itself. Phone calls from customers checking on delivery times. A bride's mother who wanted to make last-minute changes to the wedding arrangements. A funeral home requesting a standing spray with specific flowers that held meaning for the deceased's family. Each interaction required Marina to shift her approach, to read what people needed beyond just flowers, to provide the kind of emotional support that transformed a simple transaction into something more meaningful. What none of her customers realized was that Marina's gentle manner and intuitive understanding of their needs came from a different kind of training entirely. Years of reading situations quickly, of understanding what people required under stress, of maintaining calm in circumstances where panic could prove fatal. The skills that made her an exceptional florist were the same ones that had made her invaluable in military situations that most people could never imagine surviving. But that morning, arranging flowers in her peaceful shop on a quiet Portland street, Marina believed she had successfully left that other life behind. She had created exactly the kind of existence she had dreamed about during long deployments in hostile territory. A place where the biggest crisis might be running out. Of white roses during wedding season, where her most difficult decision involved choosing between different varieties of baby's breath. The irony, which Marina herself didn't fully appreciate, was that her military experience had made her better at everything she did as a civilian. Her attention to detail ensured that every arrangement was perfect. Her ability to remain calm under pressure meant that she handled even the most demanding customers with grace. Her physical discipline allowed her to work long hours without fatigue. Her strategic thinking helped her run a successful business in a competitive market. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She had transformed the skills that the military had taught her for warfare into talents that created beauty and brought joy to people's lives. It represented exactly the kind of personal transformation that she had hoped was possible when she decided to leave active duty and pursue a completely different career. As the morning approached 10 o'clock, Marina was putting the finishing touches on a particularly complex arrangement for a golden wedding anniversary celebration. 50 years of marriage seemed to demand something special, something that would honor the magnitude of such a commitment. She had chosen flowers that represented different decades of their marriage, colors that would tell a story about enduring love, textures that would create visual interest while maintaining the elegance appropriate for such a milestone. The shop was quiet except for the gentle classical music and the soft sounds of her work. Scissors cutting stems with precision, water flowing as she filled vases, the whisper of tissue paper being arranged around delicate blooms. These were the sounds of her chosen life, peaceful and productive and far removed from the harsh realities she had once faced on a daily basis. Marina had no way of knowing that 3 blocks away, a situation was developing that would shatter the careful peace she had constructed around herself. 2 armed men were discussing their plan to rob the first small business that looked like it contained enough cash to make the risk worthwhile. They had been driving through the neighborhood for 20 minutes, evaluating targets, looking for a place that appeared prosperous but not heavily protected. The flower shop, with its large windows full of expensive-looking arrangements and its location on a corner that would provide multiple escape routes, caught their attention immediately. From the street, they could see a small woman working alone. No visible security cameras, no indication that anyone else was in the building. It looked like exactly the kind of easy target they were seeking. As Marina continued working on her anniversary arrangement, completely absorbed in creating something beautiful for people celebrating a lifetime of love, she had no idea that her carefully constructed new life was about to collide catastrophically with the skills and experiences she thought she had left permanently behind. The next few hours would test whether it was really possible to transform oneself completely, or whether certain kinds of training and experience remain embedded so deeply that they can never truly be erased. The morning sun continued streaming through the windows of Bloom and Blossom Flower Shop, illuminating Marina's work as she added the final touches to the golden anniversary arrangement. In just a few minutes, her quiet Tuesday morning would become something entirely different, something that would require her to access parts of herself that she had spent 5 years trying to forget. But for now, she simply focused on the flowers, on creating beauty, on maintaining the peaceful existence she had worked so hard to build. Outside on Morrison Street, normal life continued its predictable patterns. Commuters hurried past on their way to offices downtown. The postal worker made his rounds, chatting briefly with shop owners as he delivered mail. A city bus stopped at the corner, discharging passengers who dispersed in different directions toward their daily destinations. Everything appeared exactly as it should in a safe, comfortable neighborhood, where the most excitement anyone expected was a seasonal sale at the bookstore or a new sandwich special at Tony's Deli. Marina straightened up from her workbench, stretching. The slight stiffness from her back that came from bending over intricate floral work. She stepped back to evaluate the anniversary arrangement from different angles, making sure that it would look beautiful from every perspective. The couple celebrating 50 years of marriage deserved something perfect, something that would help them remember this milestone for years to come. As she reached for her spray bottle to give the arrangement a final misting, Marina noticed a van pulling up directly in front of her shop. Two men sat in the front seats, both wearing baseball caps pulled low over their faces, both studying her storefront with an intensity that seemed unusual for casual passers-by. Something about their body language, their focus, the way they were evaluating her shop rather than simply looking at it, triggered an awareness that Marina had hoped never to need again. Her hands continued their gentle work with the flowers, but her entire nervous system shifted into a different state of readiness. Without appearing to change her routine at all, she began cataloging everything she observed about the men in the van, about the vehicle itself, about the tactical situation that might be developing. It was a response pattern so deeply ingrained that it activated automatically, regardless of her conscious desire to live a different kind of life. The transformation was invisible to any observer, but profound in its implications. The gentle florist arranging flowers for a golden anniversary celebration had just become something else entirely. Something that combined her current peaceful existence with capabilities that most people would never associate with someone who worked with delicate petals and spoke in soft, soothing tones about the symbolic meaning of different blooms. Marina continued working on her arrangement, but she was no longer simply creating something beautiful for people celebrating 50 years of marriage. She was preparing for whatever was about to happen next, drawing on training and experience that she had tried to leave behind, but which apparently could never be completely erased. The next few minutes would determine whether her new life as a gentle florist could coexist with the person she had once been, or whether certain situations demanded a complete return to capabilities that had once defined her entire existence. The van's doors opened simultaneously, and Marina's assessment of the developing situation became immediately and dramatically clear. This was not going to be a normal Tuesday morning at Bloom and Blossom Flower Shop. This was going to be something that would test every aspect of who she had been, who she had become, and who she might need to be in order to survive what was about to happen. The two men moved with practiced coordination as they exited the van, their movements synchronized in a way that immediately told Marina this was not their first robbery attempt. The taller one, wearing a faded denim jacket over a black hoodie, positioned himself near the door while his partner, shorter but more heavily built, approached the counter where Marina stood among her carefully arranged flowers. Both men kept their hands visible but ready, their eyes scanning the interior of the shop with the kind of systematic assessment that spoke of experience with similar situations. Marina's training had taught her to evaluate threats in the first 3 seconds of contact, and what she observed was both better and worse than the average robbery scenario. Better because these men appeared to be professionals who would likely want to complete their business quickly and leave without unnecessary violence. Worse because their level of organization suggested they had researched their target and would be prepared for various complications that might arise during the commission of their crime. The shorter man reached the counter first, his voice steady but carrying the kind of authority that indicated he was accustomed to being obeyed immediately. "Good morning, miss. We're going to need you to open your register and give us everything inside. No alarms, no sudden movements, no problems, and everyone goes home safe today." His tone was almost conversational, the kind of professional courtesy that experienced criminals sometimes employed to reduce the likelihood of resistance or panic from their victims. Marina's response was to slowly raise her hands to chest level, her movements deliberate and non-threatening, exactly the kind of compliance that would normally be expected from a small business owner facing armed robbery. "Of course," she said quietly, her voice carrying the slight tremor that would be natural for someone in her apparent situation. "I don't want any trouble. The register is right here." She gestured toward the old-fashioned mechanical cash register that she had chosen specifically because it fit the aesthetic of her flower shop. What the robbers could not have known was that Marina's seemingly frightened compliance was actually a tactical assessment period during which she evaluated multiple factors that would influence her response options. The positioning of both men, their apparent weapon status, the likelihood of additional accomplices outside, the structural layout of her shop including potential cover positions and escape routes, the probability that other people might enter the scene unexpectedly, and the resources available to her within arm's reach. The mechanical cash register opened with its familiar bell-like chime, revealing the modest amount of cash that Marina kept available for daily transactions. She had learned early in her business operations that maintaining large amounts of cash on the premises increased both the likelihood of robbery and the potential loss if such an incident occurred. The register contained approximately $300 in various denominations, enough to handle routine customer needs, but not enough to represent a devastating financial loss. As Marina began removing bills from the register compartments, the taller man moved deeper into the shop, apparently conducting a security sweep to ensure that no other people were present who might complicate their operation. His search pattern was thorough but efficient, checking the work area behind the counter, the small office space visible through a partially open door, and the storage areas where additional inventory was kept. "Clear back here," he called to his partner, using terminology that suggested possible military or law enforcement background. The shorter man nodded acknowledgement while maintaining his focus on Marina and the cash register. "Jewelry, too," he added, noticing the simple gold chain around her neck and the small earrings that completed her understated professional appearance. "Watch, rings, anything valuable." This expansion of their demands was concerning, because it suggested they were not simply grabbing readily available cash and leaving quickly, but were prepared to spend additional time extracting maximum value from their chosen target. Marina complied with the jewelry demand while continuing her tactical assessment of the developing situation. The men's behavior pattern suggested experience, but not necessarily sophistication. They were following a plan that had probably worked successfully for them in previous robberies, but they were not demonstrating the kind of advanced preparation that would indicate awareness of potential complications beyond the normal range of civilian resistance. As she placed her watch and jewelry on the counter next to the cash, Marina noticed several factors that were about to change the dynamic of the robbery in ways that neither of the perpetrators had anticipated. First, Mrs. Patterson from the apartment building next door was approaching the shop entrance, clearly intending to make her weekly purchase of flowers for her dining room table. Second, a Portland Police Patrol car was visible approximately 2 blocks away, moving slowly through the neighborhood on what appeared to be routine patrol rather than emergency response. The combination of these developing factors created a situation where the robbery was about to transition from a simple cash extraction to a more complex scenario involving potential hostages and law enforcement response. Marina realized that her options were narrowing rapidly and that her next few decisions would determine not only her own safety, but also the safety of Mrs. Patterson and potentially other innocent people who might become involved in what was escalating beyond a routine criminal incident. Mrs. Patterson reached the shop door just as the shorter robber was securing the cash and jewelry in a small backpack. The elderly woman pushed open the door with her characteristic determination, calling out her usual greeting. "Marina, dear, I hope you have some of those lovely yellow mums that would brighten up my apartment." She was halfway through the entrance before she registered the presence of the 2 men and the tension in the atmosphere that indicated something was very wrong. The taller robber reacted immediately to this unexpected complication, moving quickly to prevent Mrs. Patterson from leaving and potentially alerting other people or law enforcement to their presence. "Ma'am, come inside and close the door behind. You, don't make any noise, don't try to leave, and you'll be fine." His voice maintained the same professional courtesy he had used with Marina, but there was an edge of increased urgency that reflected his awareness that their simple robbery had just become significantly more complicated. Mrs. Patterson, despite her 73 years and generally gentle demeanor, was not easily intimidated. She had lived through enough decades to develop a certain resilience in the face of unexpected situations, and her first instinct was to protect Marina rather than simply comply with the robber's demands. "Young man, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is a respectable business, and Marina is a lovely girl who has never hurt anyone. You should be ashamed of yourselves." The shorter robber's response to this unexpected defiance was to reach inside his jacket and partially reveal what appeared to be a handgun, not in a directly threatening manner but clearly intended to establish the seriousness of the situation and discourage further resistance. "Ma'am, we don't want to hurt anyone, but we need you to understand that this is not a negotiation. Sit down quietly, let us finish our business, and everyone will be safe." Marina watched this interaction while continuing to evaluate her tactical options, which were becoming increasingly limited as the situation evolved. The presence of Mrs. Patterson as a potential hostage significantly complicated any response that might involve physical confrontation with the robbers. Additionally, the patrol car she had observed was now close enough that the officers inside would likely notice any unusual activity if the situation continued to escalate or if additional people became involved. What Marina understood, but what neither the robbers nor Mrs. Patterson could have anticipated, was that this transformation from simple robbery to potential hostage situation was activating decision-making processes that had been carefully trained and extensively practiced in environments where the stakes were considerably higher than small-town crime. Her military experience had included specific training in hostage situations, threat assessment under pressure, and tactical response options when civilian lives were at risk. The shorter robber was attempting to maintain control of the situation, while his partner tried to manage Mrs. Patterson, but Marina could see that neither man was fully prepared for the complexity that had developed. Their original plan had probably involved being in and out of the shop within 3 or 4 minutes, with minimal interaction and no complications. Now they were dealing with multiple people, potential law enforcement proximity, and the kind of variables that could quickly transform a manageable criminal incident into something much more serious. As if to emphasize the deteriorating situation, Marina's phone began ringing with what she recognized as the distinctive ringtone she had assigned to emergency services. This was not a customer call or routine business communication, but rather the emergency alert system that she had installed as part of her shop's security measures. The sound immediately attracted the attention of both robbers, who realized that their presence had somehow triggered an alarm or notification system they had not anticipated. The taller robber moved quickly toward the phone, clearly intending to prevent Marina from answering what he correctly assumed might be a security check or emergency response call. "Don't touch that," he ordered, his voice losing the professional courtesy that had characterized his earlier communications. The stress of the evolving situation was beginning to affect his decision-making, and Marina recognized that stressed criminals were significantly more dangerous than those operating according to plan. But the phone call was not from a security company or emergency services. It was from Detective Sarah Morrison of the Portland Police Bureau, who had been conducting a routine follow-up investigation related to a series of small business robberies in the area and had scheduled a brief interview with Marina to discuss whether she had observed any suspicious activity in her neighborhood during the past few weeks. Detective Morrison's timing, while unfortunate for the immediate situation, provided Marina with information that significantly clarified her tactical assessment. The fact that police were actively investigating similar robberies in the area meant that response time for any emergency call would likely be much faster than normal. It also meant that patrol cars would be specifically watching for unusual activity at small businesses, which explained why she had noticed the patrol car moving slowly through her neighborhood. The shorter robber's increasing agitation was becoming apparent in his body language and decision-making patterns. What had begun as a professionally executed robbery was deteriorating into the kind of chaotic situation that experienced criminals tried to avoid. He was now facing multiple variables he had not planned for: an additional hostage, potential police proximity, communication devices that might compromise their operation, and a timeline that was extending far beyond their intended parameters. Marina realized that the situation was approaching a decision point where she would need to choose between maintaining her cover as a helpless florist or accessing capabilities that might prevent serious harm to innocent people. The calculation was complex because revealing her true background would permanently end the peaceful existence she had worked so hard to create, but allowing the situation to continue deteriorating might result in violence against Mrs. Patterson or other innocent people who might become involved. The patrol car that Marina had observed earlier was now visible through the shop's front windows, moving slowly past the building in what appeared to be routine patrol activity. Neither of the robbers had noticed the police presence yet, but Marina understood that their window of opportunity for resolving this situation quietly was rapidly closing. Once law enforcement became actively involved, the dynamics would change dramatically, and the likelihood of violence would increase significantly. Mrs. Patterson, despite her age and the stress of the situation, was demonstrating the kind of resilience that Marina had learned to recognize and respect during her military service. Rather than becoming paralyzed by fear or panic, the elderly woman was quietly observing everything around her and looking for opportunities to help. Her eyes met Marina's briefly, and Marina realized that Mrs. Patterson was prepared to follow her lead if Marina chose to take action. The phone stopped ringing after going to voicemail, but the electronic sound had clearly rattled both robbers' confidence in their ability to control the situation. The shorter man was repeatedly checking his watch, obviously aware that they had already spent more time in the shop than their original plan had allowed. His partner was becoming increasingly agitated, pacing near the windows in a way that would likely attract attention from anyone passing by on the street. Marina made her decision. The situation had evolved beyond the point where passive compliance would ensure everyone's safety, and her training had taught her to recognize the moment when action became necessary to prevent greater harm. What happened next would require her to access skills and capabilities that she had hoped never to use again, but the alternative was allowing the situation to continue deteriorating until someone was seriously hurt. She began by establishing the kind of calm, authoritative presence that she had learned was essential for managing crisis situations involving multiple people under extreme stress. "Gentlemen," she said quietly, her voice carrying a different quality than the frightened compliance she had displayed earlier. "I think we need to discuss how to resolve this situation before it becomes something none of us want to deal with." The change in Marina's demeanor was subtle but unmistakable. Her posture shifted slightly, her breathing became more controlled, and her eyes took on the kind of steady focus that experienced people recognized as indicating serious competence under pressure. She was no longer simply the gentle florist who arranged beautiful bouquets for her customers' special occasions. She was accessing a different part of herself, one that had been trained to function effectively in situations where lives depended on making correct decisions quickly. The shorter robber's response to this change was immediate suspicion. Something about Marina's tone and bearing suggested that she was not as helpless as she had initially appeared, and experienced criminals learned to trust their instincts about when situations were not developing as expected. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, but his voice carried a note of uncertainty that had not been present during the earlier phases of the robbery. Marina's answer would begin the process of revealing capabilities that would fundamentally alter everyone's understanding of who she really was and what she was capable of doing when circumstances required it. The gentle florist who created beautiful arrangements for people celebrating life's important moments was about to demonstrate that she possessed other kinds of expertise entirely, skills that had been developed in environments where the stakes were considerably higher than small-town crime. I'm talking about the fact that you've got about 3 minutes before this situation becomes something that none of us can control, Marina said calmly, her voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from experience managing high-stress situations. Police patrol frequency in this neighborhood has increased by 40% in the past 2 weeks because of robberies exactly like this one. Detective Morrison is going to call back when I don't answer my phone, and when she does, she's going to request a welfare check. The information Marina provided was accurate and specific in a way that immediately got both robbers' attention. This was not the kind of general knowledge that a typical small business owner would possess, but rather the sort of detailed situational awareness that suggested access to law enforcement information or experience with tactical planning. Both men realized simultaneously that their assessment of their target had been incomplete and potentially dangerous. Mrs. Patterson watched this exchange with growing interest rather than increased fear. Something about Marina's transformation from frightened victim to calm problem solver was inspiring confidence rather than additional worry. The elderly woman had lived long enough to recognize competence when she saw it, and Marina's current demeanor suggested that she knew exactly what she was doing and had the skills necessary to manage the situation effectively. The taller robber moved closer to the front windows, confirming Marina's assessment about police presence in the area. The patrol car was now parked at the intersection, its occupants apparently engaged in routine paperwork but positioned where they could observe activity along the entire block. "She's right," he told his partner. "We need to finish this and get out of here immediately, or we're going to have a much bigger problem." But Marina was not finished providing information that would reshape everyone's understanding of the tactical situation. "The patrol car at the intersection is running a license plate check on your van," she continued, her voice maintaining the same calm authority. "Standard procedure when officers observe vehicles that don't match normal traffic patterns for the area. You've got maybe 2 minutes before they decide to investigate further." This level of specific knowledge about police procedures and tactical assessment was impossible to dismiss as lucky guessing. Both robbers realized that Marina possessed expertise that extended far beyond flower arranging, and that their robbery was being managed by someone who understood law enforcement response protocols at a level that suggested professional experience. The shorter robber's hand moved closer to his concealed weapon, but his expression indicated confusion rather than immediate aggression. Marina recognized the signs of escalating tension and the potential for violence that occurred when criminals realized they had seriously misjudged their target. Her next words were chosen carefully to provide these men with information that would help them make better decisions, while simultaneously establishing her credibility as someone whose advice they should take seriously. "I spent 3 tours in Afghanistan as an explosives ordnance disposal specialist," she said quietly, her voice carrying the matter-of-fact tone that military personnel used when discussing their professional background. "I've been in situations considerably more complicated than this one, and I've learned that the best way to resolve problems is to focus on solutions rather than escalation. Right now we still have options that end with everyone walking away safely." The revelation of Marina's military background immediately changed the entire dynamic of the situation. Both robbers realized that they were not dealing with a typical civilian victim, but rather with someone whose training and experience in high-stress situations probably exceeded their own. This was not necessarily bad news for them, since Marina's professional background suggested that she would be focused on de-escalation rather than heroics. But it meant that their assumptions about controlling the situation had been completely Wrong. Mrs. Patterson's reaction to learning about Marina's military service was a mixture of surprise and pride. She had always sensed that there was more to the quiet florist than met the eye, but she had attributed Marina's calm competence to artistic temperament rather than combat experience. The knowledge that Marina was a military veteran significantly increased Mrs. Patterson's confidence that the situation would be resolved successfully. Marina continued her tactical briefing, providing information that would help everyone involved make better decisions about their next actions. The good news is that you haven't committed any violent crimes yet, which means that if we handle this correctly, you're looking at simple robbery charges rather than armed robbery with hostages. The bad news is that window of opportunity is closing rapidly, and once law enforcement becomes actively involved, your options become much more limited. The shorter robber was processing this information while trying to maintain control of a situation that had clearly evolved beyond his original planning. Marina's military background explained her unusual calm and her detailed knowledge of law enforcement procedures, but it also meant that any attempt to use force against her would likely be considerably more dangerous than he had anticipated. His training in criminal activity had not prepared him for dealing with someone whose professional background included significantly more serious forms of conflict. "What are you suggesting?" he asked, his voice indicating that he was genuinely interested in Marina's assessment rather than simply trying to maintain dominance over the situation. This was the kind of practical criminal thinking that Marina had hoped to encourage, a focus on successful completion of their objective rather than ego-driven confrontation that would likely result in violence. Marina's response demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that had made her valuable in military situations where complex problems required creative solutions. "You take the cash and jewelry, thank us politely for our cooperation, and leave through the back exit that connects to the alley behind this building. Your van stays where it is for exactly 10 minutes. Which gives you time to reach the secondary vehicle that I assume you have positioned for situations like this. Mrs. Patterson and I discuss what a lovely morning it's been, and when Detective Morrison calls back, we mention that we haven't noticed any unusual activity in the neighborhood." The plan that Marina outlined was sophisticated in its simplicity and demonstrated her understanding of both criminal methodology and law enforcement response patterns. She was providing the robbers with a solution that maximized their chances of successful escape while minimizing the risk of violence or extended law enforcement pursuit. More importantly, her suggestions indicated that she understood their operational planning better than they had understood her capabilities. Both robbers realized that Marina's proposed solution was significantly better than any plan they had developed for dealing with the complications that had arisen during their robbery attempt. Her military background meant that her tactical assessment was probably more accurate than their own, and her suggested escape route indicated knowledge of the neighborhood layout that exceeded what they had learned during their pre-robbery surveillance. The taller robber was already moving toward the back of the shop to verify the exit route that Marina had mentioned. "There's a clear path to the alley," he confirmed, "and no direct sight lines from the street." This verification of Marina's information increased both men's confidence that her suggested plan might actually work, despite the complications that had developed during their robbery. ATTEMPT. Mrs. Patterson followed this tactical discussion with fascination rather than fear. She was beginning to understand that Marina's transformation from gentle florist to military strategist was not the result of panic or desperation, but rather the activation of professional skills that had been temporarily dormant but never truly abandoned. The elderly woman realized that she was witnessing something quite remarkable, the emergence of capabilities that most people would never have suspected existed beneath Marina's carefully constructed peaceful exterior. Marina's final instructions to the robbers demonstrated the kind of attention to detail that characterized military planning at its most effective. "Take the jewelry but leave the watch," she said calmly. Jewelry can't be traced. But the watch has GPS tracking that activates when it's removed from proximity to my phone for more than 15 minutes. Your vehicle description is already in the police database from previous robberies, so change your license plates before you return to normal traffic patterns. This level of tactical advice was so sophisticated that both robbers realized Marina was providing them with information that would significantly improve their chances of avoiding capture. She was not simply trying to end the immediate situation, but actually helping them execute their crime more successfully. This was the kind of professional courtesy that military personnel sometimes extended to adversaries who conducted themselves with competence and avoided unnecessary violence. The shorter robber secured the cash and selected jewelry in his backpack while his partner confirmed that the alley exit was clear of obstacles or potential witnesses. Both men realized that Marina's suggestions had transformed what had become a deteriorating situation into a manageable tactical problem with clear solutions. They were no longer operating blind in an environment they didn't understand, but following advice from someone whose expertise they could trust. As the robbers prepared to leave through Marina's suggested exit route, the transformation in the shop's atmosphere was remarkable. What had begun as a tense confrontation with potential for violence had evolved into something resembling a professional consultation on tactical planning. Marina had successfully managed the crisis by accessing skills that she had hoped never to need again, but which had proven essential for protecting innocent people and preventing serious harm. The robber's departure was as professionally executed as Marina's advice had been strategically sound. They thanked her quietly for her cooperation, acknowledged Mrs. Patterson respectfully, and left through the back exit with the kind of disciplined movement that suggested they understood they had been fortunate to encounter someone whose military background had enabled her to provide solutions rather than complications. Mrs. Patterson waited until she was certain the men had left the building before turning to Marina with an expression that combined amazement, admiration, and just a touch of concern. "My dear," she said quietly, "I think there are some things about you that I didn't know." Her tone was gentle rather than accusatory, but it was clear that the morning's events had fundamentally changed her understanding of who Marina really was. Marina's response to Mrs. Patterson's observation was measured and honest, reflecting the reality that her carefully constructed cover story had been permanently compromised by the morning's events. "There are quite a few things about me that most people don't know," she admitted quietly, her voice carrying a note of resignation mixed with relief. "I've spent the last 5 years trying to be someone completely different from who I used to be, and I thought I had succeeded until about 20 minutes ago." The elderly woman settled into one of the chairs that Marina kept near the front counter for customers who needed to rest while making decisions about floral arrangements. Mrs. Patterson's demeanor suggested that she was prepared to listen rather than judge, and her expression indicated genuine interest in understanding the person she had thought she knew as simply the neighborhood's gentle florist. "I've lived long enough to learn that everyone has stories they don't tell," she said gently. "But what I saw this morning wasn't just hidden knowledge. That was training, experience, the kind of competence that saves lives." Marina began the process of securing her shop and ensuring that no evidence remained of the morning's unusual events while she considered how much of her background she was comfortable sharing. The mechanical cash register needed to be reset, the jewelry display case required reorganization, and she wanted to verify that the robbers had not left anything behind that might complicate future investigations. But mostly, she was processing the reality that her peaceful existence as a neighborhood florist had been fundamentally altered by circumstances beyond her control. "I joined the army when I was 18, Marina began, her voice taking on the vague, reflective tone that people used when discussing significant life changes. Fresh out of high school, no real direction, looking for structure and purpose and maybe some college money. I scored well on the aptitude tests, and they offered me specialized training in explosive ordnance disposal. It seemed like important work, something that would help protect people, so I accepted. Mrs. Patterson listened with the kind of focused attention that indicated genuine interest in understanding Marina's journey from military service to flower arranging. The elderly woman had lived through enough decades to appreciate the complexity of life transitions, and she recognized that Marina's current peaceful existence represented a conscious choice rather than simply a default career path. The training for explosive ordnance disposal had been intensive and comprehensive, Marina explained, covering not just the technical aspects of identifying and neutralizing various types of explosive devices, but also the psychological preparation necessary for work that involved life or death decisions made under extreme pressure. The military had invested considerable time and resources in developing her expertise, and she had proven exceptionally capable at work that required steady hands, analytical thinking, and the ability to remain calm when other people's lives depended on her competence. Her first deployment had been to Afghanistan, where improvised explosive devices were a constant threat to both military personnel and civilian populations. Marina's work involved responding to reports of suspicious objects, analyzing potential threats, and either safely removing dangerous devices or rendering them harmless through controlled detonation. The technical challenges were significant, but the psychological demands were even greater, since mistakes in her field typically resulted in casualties rather than simply mission delays. The work was satisfying in ways that are difficult to explain to people who haven't done it. Marina continued, organizing the jewelry display while she spoke. Every device I successfully disabled meant that people went home safely to their families. Every convoy that made it through a cleared route represented lives preserved. But the constant stress, the awareness that any mistake could be fatal, the responsibility for other people's safety, it changes you in ways that are hard to reverse. Mrs. Patterson nodded with understanding, recognizing that Marina was describing the kind of profound life experience that left permanent marks on a person's character and worldview. That explains a great deal about how you handled those young men this morning, she observed. You weren't just guessing about police procedures or robbery patterns. You were analyzing a tactical situation and developing solutions based on real experience with crisis management. During her second deployment, Marina's expertise had expanded beyond individual explosive device disposal to include training local security forces and civilian populations in threat recognition and basic safety procedures. This work required different skills, the ability to communicate complex technical information to people with limited military background, patience with students who were learning under stress, and cultural sensitivity when working with populations who had different approaches to authority and protocol. The most challenging aspect of this training role was helping people understand that effective security required constant vigilance without allowing fear to dominate their daily lives. Marina had learned to teach techniques for maintaining awareness while preserving the ability to enjoy normal activities, to recognize genuine threats while avoiding paranoia, and to respond appropriately to dangerous situations without losing the capacity for peaceful existence when circumstances permitted. Her third deployment had involved even more specialized work, including collaboration with international teams on complex disposal operations that required coordination between multiple military units and civilian agencies. This experience had taught her advanced project management skills, diplomatic communication techniques, and the kind of strategic thinking that could be applied to problems far beyond military contexts. But the accumulated stress of 3 combat deployments had begun to affect Marina's psychological well-being in ways that concerned her commanding officers and worried her personally. The constant exposure to life-threatening situations, the responsibility for other people's survival, and the knowledge that any moment of inattention could result in catastrophic consequences had created a level of hypervigilance that made normal civilian life increasingly difficult to navigate. "I started having trouble sleeping," Marina admitted, her voice reflecting the difficulty of discussing this period of her life. Not just occasional insomnia, but the kind of chronic sleep disruption that affects everything: judgment, reflexes, emotional stability. "I would lie awake analyzing every sound, every variation in routine, treating my own apartment like a potential threat environment. It wasn't sustainable, and it wasn't fair to the people who depended on me professionally." The decision to leave active military service had been difficult because Marina's work was genuinely important, and she was exceptionally good at it. Her commanding officers had invested significant resources in her training and experience, and there were ongoing missions that would benefit from her continued participation. But Marina recognized that her effectiveness was being compromised by psychological stress, and that continuing in her role might actually endanger the people she was trying to protect. Mrs. Patterson understood the complexity of Marina's decision to leave military service because she had seen similar struggles in her own family members who had served in various conflicts over the decades. "It takes courage to recognize when you need to make a change," she observed, "especially when other people are depending on your skills. But it also takes wisdom to understand that taking care of yourself is part of taking care of others." The transition from military service to civilian life had been more challenging than Marina had anticipated. The structure and clear mission objectives that had defined her daily existence for years were suddenly absent, replaced by the need to make independent decisions about career direction, living arrangements, and personal relationships without the support system that military life provided. Additionally, her specialized skills had limited application in most civilian occupations, making career planning particularly difficult. Marina had initially considered work in law enforcement or private security, fields where her military experience would be directly relevant and valuable. But after extensive consideration, she realized that these career paths would likely perpetuate the same psychological stress patterns that had prompted her to leave active duty. She needed work that would allow her to help people while providing the kind of peaceful environment that would support psychological recovery and personal growth. The idea of opening a flower shop had emerged gradually during a period when Marina was volunteering at a veterans rehabilitation center, helping other former military personnel adjust to civilian life. She had discovered that working with plants and flowers provided a form of therapeutic activity that engaged her attention without triggering the hypervigilance responses that made relaxation difficult. The precise work required for floral arranging satisfied her need for technical challenge while creating something beautiful rather than preventing something destructive. "I researched the flower business for almost a year before I actually opened the shop," Marina explained, straightening the display of seasonal arrangements that had been disturbed during the morning's events. "I wanted to understand everything about customer expectations, supplier relationships, seasonal variations in demand, the financial requirements for sustainable operation." It was a completely different kind of analysis from anything I had done in the military, but it required the same attention to detail and strategic planning. The process of establishing her flower shop had been both practically challenging and psychologically healing. Marina had needed to learn new skills in business management, customer service, artistic design, and retail operations, while simultaneously working to develop a public persona that was completely different from her military identity. The physical work of setting up the shop, learning about different types of flowers and their care requirements, and developing relationships with suppliers had provided the kind of structured activity that supported her transition to civilian life. More importantly, the daily work of creating beautiful arrangements for people celebrating important life events had gradually restored Marina's sense of purpose and connection to normal human activities. Instead of focusing on preventing disasters, she was contributing to moments of joy, comfort, and celebration. Instead of working in environments where mistakes could be fatal, she was operating in a context where the worst possible outcome might be a disappointed customer or a wilted bouquet. Mrs. Patterson had been one of Marina's first regular customers, and the elderly woman's weekly visits had become an important part of establishing the routine and community connections that supported Marina's new life. "I remember when you first opened," Mrs. Patterson recalled. "You seemed so determined to get everything exactly right, but also somehow nervous about whether people would accept you as part of the neighborhood. Now I understand that you were learning to be someone completely different from who you had been." The development of Marina's reputation as the neighborhood's gentle florist had been a conscious construction project that required careful attention to every aspect of her public presentation. She had studied the mannerisms and communication patterns that people associated with artistic, peaceful personalities, practiced speaking in softer tones and using more tentative language than came naturally to her, and deliberately cultivated the kind of appearance that would reinforce assumptions about her background and temperament. This transformation had been successful beyond Marina's expectations. Within 2 years of opening her shop, she had become integrated into the neighborhood community in ways that felt genuine and sustainable. Customers trusted her judgment about floral selections, confided in her about their personal celebrations and sorrows, and treated her with the kind of casual affection that indicated real acceptance rather than polite commercial interaction. But the morning's robbery had demonstrated that Marina's military training and experience could never be completely erased or ignored when circumstances required their activation. The skills that had made her effective in combat situations remained available when needed, even after 5 years of consciously practicing a completely different way of being in the world. This realization was both reassuring and troubling, since it meant that her peaceful existence was perhaps more fragile than she had believed. "The question now," Marina said thoughtfully, "is whether I can continue being the person I've chosen to become, or whether this morning changes everything permanently." She was genuinely uncertain about the answer, since the community's perception of her had been fundamentally altered by Mrs. Patterson's witness to her capabilities under pressure. Mrs. Patterson's response reflected the kind of practical wisdom that came from decades of observing human nature and community dynamics. "My dear, what happened this morning doesn't change who you are now. It just reveals that who you are now includes more capabilities than most people realized. The customers who come here for flowers aren't going to stop needing beautiful arrangements for their special occasions. The only difference is that some of us will appreciate even more what you've chosen to do with your life." The conversation was interrupted by Detective Morrison's return call, which Marina answered with the calm professionalism that she had displayed throughout the morning's events. The detective's inquiry about suspicious activity in the neighborhood provided Marina with an opportunity to demonstrate how her military experience could be integrated with her civilian identity rather than replacing it entirely. "Detective Morrison, this is Marina Chen at Bloom and Blossom. I received your earlier call about the robbery investigation. I wanted to report that we had 2 men in the shop this morning who seemed to be conducting some kind of surveillance, but they left without incident when they realized we didn't keep large amounts of cash on the premises." Marina's report was technically accurate while omitting details that would unnecessarily complicate the investigation or compromise the robber's successful escape. Detective Morrison's response indicated professional interest in Marina's observations. "Can you provide descriptions of these individuals and any details about their vehicle or behavior patterns?" The detective's questions were routine for this type of investigation, but Marina's answers demonstrated the kind of precise observational skills that immediately got law enforcement attention. Marina provided detailed descriptions of both men, their clothing, approximate ages, and physical characteristics, along with complete information about their vehicle, including make, model, color, and partial license plate numbers. Her recall was extraordinarily precise, The kind of comprehensive situational awareness that indicated either exceptional natural observation skills or professional training in intelligence gathering techniques. Ms. Chen, your observational skills are quite impressive, Detective Morrison noted. Have you had experience with law enforcement or security work? The question was asked casually, but Marina recognized it as an attempt to understand why a florist would have such detailed recall about suspicious individuals. I'm a military veteran, Marina replied simply, providing accurate information without unnecessary elaboration. 3 deployments overseas in situations where attention to detail was important for personal safety. Old habits, I suppose. Her explanation satisfied the detective's curiosity, while establishing credibility for her observations without revealing the specific nature of her military expertise. Detective Morrison accepted Marina's information and indicated that it would be valuable for the ongoing investigation into the series of small business robberies in the area. The detective also mentioned that patrol frequency in the neighborhood would continue at elevated levels until the perpetrators were apprehended, which Marina acknowledged with appropriate appreciation for law enforcement's attention to community safety. After ending the call with Detective Morrison, Marina realized that her handling of the police interview demonstrated how her military experience could be integrated into her civilian life rather than hidden from it. She could be honest about her background without providing unnecessary details, could use her skills when circumstances required them without abandoning her chosen identity as a peaceful florist, and could contribute to community safety without compromising the quiet existence she had worked to create. Mrs. Patterson had listened to Marina's conversation with Detective Morrison with obvious admiration for the younger woman's ability to provide helpful information while maintaining appropriate boundaries about her personal background. You handled that perfectly, the elderly woman observed. Professional and helpful without revealing more than necessary about your own situation. The remainder of the morning proceeded with surprising normalcy, considering the dramatic events that had occurred earlier. Marina completed the golden anniversary arrangement that had been interrupted by the robbery, assisted Mrs. Patterson in selecting yellow mums for her apartment, and began preparation work for the Henderson wedding arrangements that were scheduled for completion later in the week. The familiar rhythm of her business activities provided a sense of continuity that helped process the morning's unusual events. But the dynamic between Marina and Mrs. Patterson had changed permanently, evolving from the casual friendliness appropriate between a business owner and regular customer to something approaching genuine friendship based on shared experience and mutual respect. Mrs. Patterson's witness to Marina's capabilities under pressure had created a foundation for deeper understanding and trust that would influence their relationship going forward. During the lunch hour, several other regular customers visited the shop for routine purchases, and Marina found herself evaluating whether her interactions with them felt different now that her military background had been partially revealed. Mr. Rodriguez arrived for his weekly yellow roses. The young professional who was planning the anniversary surprise called to confirm delivery arrangements, and the funeral home director stopped by to discuss arrangements for a service scheduled for the following day. None of these customers appeared to notice any change in Marina's demeanor or behavior, which suggested that her ability to maintain her chosen identity had not been permanently compromised by the morning's events. She could still be the gentle, artistic florist who created beautiful arrangements for people's special occasions, while also being someone with additional capabilities that could be accessed when circumstances required them. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor who would further test Marina's ability to integrate her military experience with her civilian identity. A young woman in military uniform entered the shop, clearly nervous about her mission but determined to complete it successfully. She introduced herself as Specialist Jennifer Walsh from the local Army recruiting station, and her presence immediately created tension for Marina about maintaining her carefully constructed cover story "Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you during business hours," Specialist Walsh began, "but I've been instructed to make contact with former military personnel in the area as part of a community outreach program. Our records indicate that you served with distinction in Afghanistan, and we're hoping you might be willing to participate in a mentorship program for women considering military careers." Marina's initial reaction was concern about how this military connection might affect her relationship with civilian customers and her integration into the neighborhood community. But Mrs. Patterson's presence during this interaction provided an opportunity to observe how people who knew her civilian identity would react to learning about her military background from an official source. "I had no idea you were a veteran," Specialist Walsh continued, clearly impressed by Marina's service record. "Explosives ordnance disposal, 3 combat deployments, commendations for valor under fire. The recruiting command is very interested in having someone with your background. Speak to young women who are considering similar career paths." Mrs. Patterson's reaction to this information was pride rather than surprise, since she had already learned about Marina's military service during the morning's events. But her response provided Marina with insight into how other community members might process this revelation about her background. "Marina is exactly the kind of person who should be mentoring young women," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "She has exceptional skills, but more importantly, she has wisdom about how to use those skills responsibly." Marina's conversation with Specialist Walsh revealed that her military service was viewed by the Army as exemplary rather than problematic, despite her decision to leave active duty for psychological health reasons. Her commanders had noted her contributions to mission success, her effectiveness in training roles, and her potential for continued advancement within the military structure. The fact that she had chosen to leave service was respected as a personal decision rather than viewed as a defection or failure. "The mentorship program is completely voluntary," Specialist Walsh explained, "and it would involve maybe 1 or 2 sessions per month with small groups of women who are considering military careers. We're not asking you to recruit anyone, just to share your experiences and help them understand what military service actually involves beyond what they see in movies or recruitment materials." The request provided Marina with an opportunity to contribute to her community in a way that utilized her military experience without requiring her to abandon her civilian identity. She could help young women make informed decisions about military careers while continuing to operate her flower shop and maintain her peaceful existence. It represented the kind of integration between her past and present that she had not previously considered possible. After agreeing to participate in the mentorship program on a limited basis, Marina found herself reflecting on how the morning's events had fundamentally altered her understanding of her own identity and capabilities. She had spent 5 years trying to completely transform herself from a military explosives expert to a civilian florist. But the robbery had demonstrated that true integration might involve acknowledging both aspects of her experience rather than hiding one of them. Mrs. Patterson's continued presence in the shop during these interactions had provided Marina with valuable insight into how people who knew her well would respond to learning about her military background. The elderly woman's reaction had been admiration and increased respect rather than fear or discomfort, suggesting that Marina's concerns about community acceptance might have been unnecessarily pessimistic. As the afternoon progressed, Marina began to consider how she might gradually become more open about her military experience without compromising the peaceful existence she had worked to create. The mentorship program would provide a structured way to acknowledge her background while contributing to her community. Her relationship with Mrs. Patterson had demonstrated that genuine friendships could accommodate the complexity of her full identity rather than requiring her to maintain artificial limitations about who she could be. The day's final customer was a young man seeking advice about flowers for a marriage proposal. and Marina found herself drawing on both her artistic expertise and her military experience with mission planning to help him create a proposal scenario that would be both romantic and logistically successful. Her suggestions about timing, location, backup plans, and contingency considerations reflected strategic thinking that enhanced rather than contradicted her floral design recommendations. The young man's gratitude for Marina's comprehensive assistance provided her with evidence that her military skills could enhance her civilian work rather than compromising it. Her ability to think systematically about complex scenarios, anticipate potential problems, and develop effective solutions was valuable in business contexts as well as military situations. As Marina prepared to close her shop at the end of this extraordinary day, she realized that the morning's robbery had provided her with an unexpected gift. Instead of destroying the peaceful existence she had worked to create, the crisis had demonstrated that she could integrate her military experience with her civilian identity in ways that made both aspects of her life more meaningful and effective. Mrs. Patterson remained in the shop until closing time, apparently reluctant to end a day that had fundamentally changed her understanding of her neighborhood and the remarkable woman who had created such a beautiful business within it. "My dear," she said as Marina locked the front door, "I hope you understand that what happened this morning doesn't change how any of us see you. It just helps us appreciate even more what you've chosen to do with your extraordinary capabilities." Marina's response reflected her growing understanding that true peace might involve acknowledging her complete identity rather than hiding significant portions of it. "I think I'm beginning to understand that being peaceful doesn't require pretending I've never been anything else," she said thoughtfully. "Maybe the real challenge is learning how to be all of who I am while choosing to focus on creating beauty rather than preventing destruction." The conversation continued as they walked together toward their respective homes, with Mrs. Patterson sharing her own experiences with major life transitions and Marina describing her hopes for continuing to develop her flower shop while also contributing to her community through the Veterans Mentorship Program. Both women recognized that the morning's events had fundamentally altered their relationship and their understanding of what was possible when people were willing to reveal their complete selves rather than maintaining carefully constructed facades. As they reached the corner where their paths diverged, Mrs. Patterson made an observation that would influence Marina's thinking about her future choices. "You know, dear, the most impressive thing about this morning wasn't your ability to handle those criminals or your knowledge of police procedures. It was your willingness to use exceptional skills in service of protecting ordinary people like me. That's the kind of heroism that actually matters in daily life." Marina walked the final 2 blocks to her apartment above the flower shop with a sense of possibility that she had not experienced since leaving military service. The day's events had demonstrated that her military training and her civilian identity could coexist and even enhance each other rather than requiring her to choose between them. She could continue creating beautiful flower arrangements while also acknowledging that she possessed other capabilities that could be valuable when circumstances required them. The integration of her complete identity would require ongoing adjustment and careful consideration of how much information to share with different people in various contexts. But the morning's crisis had provided her with evidence that such integration was possible, and that her community was capable of accepting the complexity of who she really was rather than requiring her to maintain artificial limitations about her background and capabilities. That evening, as Marina prepared for sleep in her apartment above Bloom and Blossom Flower Shop, she reflected on how completely her life had changed in the space of a single morning. She was still the gentle florist who created beautiful arrangements for people's special occasions, but she was also acknowledged as someone with additional capabilities that could be accessed when needed. She was still committed to maintaining a peaceful existence, but she no longer felt required to pretend that she had never been anyone else. The telephone call from Detective Morrison later that evening provided Marina with information that confirmed the success of her morning's tactical decisions. The two robbers had been apprehended during an attempted robbery of a convenience store across town, apparently having followed Marina's advice about changing their license plates and avoiding their original vehicle, but having failed to develop an equally sophisticated plan for their next target. "Ms. Chen, I wanted to thank you again for your assistance with our investigation," Detective Morrison said. "Your observations were instrumental in developing the suspect descriptions that led to their apprehension. The community is fortunate to have citizens with your level of awareness and civic responsibility." Marina accepted the detective's thanks while recognizing that her contribution to community safety had been possible because of her military experience rather than despite it. Her ability to provide accurate suspect descriptions, tactical assessment of the situation, and strategic advice about resolution had all been enhanced by her background in explosive ordnance disposal and combat operations. As she prepared for sleep, Marina realized that the next day would begin a new phase of her life, one that integrated her military experience with her civilian identity, rather than requiring her to choose between them. She would continue operating her flower shop and creating beautiful arrangements for her customers' special occasions, but she would also acknowledge her background and capabilities when doing so could contribute to community safety or help other people navigate difficult situations. The transformation was not complete and would require ongoing attention and adjustment as Marina learned how to be all of who she was while maintaining the peaceful existence she had worked to create. But the morning's crisis had provided her with evidence that such integration was possible and that her community was prepared to accept the complexity of her complete identity rather than requiring her to maintain artificial limitations about her background and capabilities. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.